All right, we're back, and it is COMP1073, and it's the winter 2017 semester at Georgian, and we are client-side scripting week 3, part 2 of our broadcast. And we just left off talking about Microsoft Azure as a service we can connect to for our live site, as well as GitHub pages as the other option, right? So those are the two things we just left off doing. We're going to talk about more about Visual Studio Code and our JavaScript, which is really what this course is about. I have to take it back, actually. It's not just about JavaScript. This course is about client-side services, client-side scripting. Part of client-side scripting is setting up your environment, which we've kind of done a couple times over and over again till this day, right? One thing I have to note that I've kind of, I keep on forgetting that to tell you guys is to fix yourself. A lot of times if you get unrecognized command on Windows, a lot of times what fixes people is if you go to git.sem, right, .com, you go to git-sem.com. If you're a Windows user, Mac, you don't have to do this. And if you download git-sem.com and follow the prompts for this, you could set it up so that you never have a problem with Git again. Right now, if you have issues with your command prompt, please get them settled. Right? Don't leave it that it's unrecognized command, because when we get into our midterm, you're going to need Git. It's required, right? Git and GitHub, all that connectivity. You can't have not done it, right? Or even sometimes people will help you. Maybe you have a friend that helps you do it. Okay, but that's not going to help you on the exam. It's actually going to make it worse. So make sure you know how to do it when you come into the exam, because you're going to build something, and you're going to have to do it. I don't want you fixing Git on the exam. We don't have no time for that. If you want to try, go ahead, but it's a waste of your time, okay? All right, so that's how we fix things. We also talk about GitHub pages. I don't need this right now. Microsoft Azure, we're going to get back to this because I'm going to have to show you what this does. All right, so where we left off last time, we talked about in our scripts folder, we have this app.js, and we talked about how to create a link, right? A hook is what I call it, hooks, onto our index.html. So index.html, I want you to think about it as a manifest. I have some code here in my index.html. I'm looking at lesson 3. It's up online on GitHub, of course, so you can follow along. And if you're too slow or you couldn't make yours work, please download mine so we're on the same page. Okay, let's not start from scratch. All right, so I'm looking at lesson 3. It's up on GitHub, COMP1073-W2017 lesson 3, right? Notice down here is where I have my H1 tag, as well as my click me button. It's my click me button. The thing to note about my click me button isn't the class that colors it. My click me button has a class. This is a Bootstrap class and a CSS class, this thing. Remember, the Bootstrap library is a CSS library to make life easier for us, because this is not a CSS course, right? And what I've done here, I need an ID or some kind of other identifier, something else to hook into. I need to create a reference to what I have on the page. Let me draw it out for you a little bit, because sometimes people just don't understand what I mean when I say hook, right? And I think it's important to get this piece. And I'm going to use a little drawing program here to do that, Sketchbook Pro. Okay. Sketchbook Pro, for those people who don't know, is a drawing program you can download. It's not free. It's from Autodesk. It's a great little drawing program. If you have a tablet computer, which I do, it'll allow you to draw directly on here, right? So you can see what I'm doing. Now, from now, I'm just going to use the mouse. I don't need to do it too complex. But I want you to think about it in terms of a couple of boxes. So we have a box, right? Let's suppose that we have our HTML page here. This is my HTML page in this thing. And I'm not going to label it here because I want to put this so you can see it, HTML page, right? Whatever it is. And we're going to move it around. So I'm going to put it up here. So there's my HTML page. Yay. Wonderful. I also want to make another page, right, which is my JavaScript page. This is my JavaScript page. And let's call this app.css. This could be any HTML page, right, that's connected to this, right? So we're going to make another text box. We'll call this app.js, let's say. Here it is. And my app.js page is here, right? So here's my app.js page. This could be any HTML page. Let's suppose, just for a second, that this is my index.html. It could be other ones, but for now, you can think of it as my index.html. Great. Well, you know what? I also have a link. Normally, inside my HTML page, I have different sections. So here, I'm going to draw, this is the head, and this is the body, right? So in my body tag somewhere, I've got my head section. I have some CSS links. In my body tag at the bottom, I have a link to app.js. Yeah? Okay. So this link, it goes from here, and app.js, actually when the compiler or the interpreter starts reading all the lines of my index.html, suppose these are all the line numbers, when it gets finally down to this, when it reads this, it includes the entire app.js file right here at the bottom of your code. Actually, it includes it in. It's what's built into the entire page at the end, right? That's how it works, right? So as soon as I include app.js, it's included down here, right? Okay, but I want to make a link. Let's suppose I have an h1 tag now. So I have an h1 tag that I want to change. So this is some kind of element that I'm latching onto. Here's my element, this one. And I want to create a link from my code to the element. I need to create something called a reference, okay? And for me, I'm just going to undo this line here for a second, right? And all these lines here, just so that way you can see what I'm talking about. I want to create this page again. So here's my HTML element. That's what it is. Inside my body, I'm going to pull this in. So HTML element, right? That's what it is. And this HTML element, I want to put inside my body. Here's my body tag, right? And let me undo that. And let me cancel that and undo that again. Sorry. One more time. HTML element. So it fits. That's what I want. So I want it to fit for you. So just think about this as my blackboard, all right, or my whiteboard. I just think that the font is a little bit too big, and that's why you can't see it. Yeah, we'll make it so it's smaller, much smaller. Oh, much smaller. What this, like 24? That might be okay. That's too big. That's probably what it was. One more time. Sorry. Bear with me, guys. Just so that you get everything. I want you to understand everything. So again, HTML element. We're much smaller font. We'll go into, I don't know, some size 12. All right? 12 font. What was that? Let's try this again. Font, 12 font. That's too small. 14, maybe 18. I was right the first time, 24. All right, and let's try that again. Okay, and now if I take this off and put it inside, so just so you know what it is, any HTML element goes in there. Okay, that's the HTML element. And what I want to do is I want to make some code over here, so some kind of code over here to link to this. So what I want to do is, let's say I have another little piece of code, right? Here's my code. And this applies to anything we do with JavaScript, right? So this is code. Hopefully this won't be massive again. That's pretty, well, actually that might be okay. Code. Yeah, that's fine. We can probably fit that in. Code, right? And what I want to do is I want to link my code to the HTML element, right? So I'm making a line, and we're going to, I know this is tedious, guys. Please bear with me if you know what I'm doing. And you're like, why is it taking so long to do this? Because this way you understand what I'm talking about. And when I say reference, you know what I'm talking about. This link that I want to make to point to my HTML element, so this arrow that I got here to point to my HTML element, this thing here is a reference, right? I want you to think of it as a reference. I'm going to kind of put it out there. So this is a reference. And let's make this one smaller. We'll go to, like, I don't know, 14. Okay, that's fine, 24. So this is the reference link right here, right? And what I want to do, right? Sorry for me being so meticulous here. But this reference, this link that I'm creating, this hook, call it whatever you like, I need to latch onto something on my HTML element. And what do I latch onto typically? The ID, right? The ID of the element, the ID attribute. Going back to code, right? You can see that I have an ID attribute on the HTML side that's called click me button. I've named it click me button. You can call it whatever you want, but there has to be some kind of ID attribute that you configure. on the HTML side. Now on the app.js side, I'm going to use the document object model, and I'm going to use the method of the document object model called getElementById. That's just the method. It's going to search, right? Look what it says. If I hover over it, it says returns a reference to the first object with the specified value of ID or name attribute. So what does this mean? This means that it's going to look for all objects inside my document that have an ID of click me button. But it's going to only look at the first one. I can find 10 of them, but I only care about the first one. That first one is going to return a reference. And the reference, right, just to put it down here, right, the reference itself, what is a reference? What does that mean? Well, reference, right, is equal to memory address. That's what it is. So I'm going to get the memory address, right? That's the way I want you to think about it. Let's go to 24, right? The memory address of my file, right? Right, the memory address of my HTML element. Okay. So once I have that memory address, I can treat that piece of code as if it is the HTML element. Okay, it's not the HTML element. It could be. I mean, again, I can point to any HTML element with an ID. Let me demonstrate that. Okay, so if I go back here, and I have a click me button, but on my index.html, and try this out, I also have an h1 tag called h1, right? I want to add an ID to my h1 tag. I can do that because it's just an attribute. So I go ID is equal to, and I'll call this first h1. First h1. Huh? Is that legal? Is that a legal name? Yes, it is. First h1, it's just an ID, right? I made whatever I want in here. I could also call it first heading. If you're really a stickler, you might want to call this first heading. Okay? That's fine. I'm going to go to my app.js now. On the app.js side, I want to make a reference to my first heading, okay? And I want to do it before my button. So I'm going to give some room here. So here's my app started. Kind of scroll. I'm just going to make some room, right? And what I want to do here is make a reference. I need to create a variable. And today is all about data. A variable is an object, right? A container that can contain data. It can also contain memory addresses, right? That's what a variable is. In most languages, when I declare a variable, I need to declare it with a data type. Have you guys done any kind of programming at all? Then you guys should know about basic variables. Variables are, objects that can contain data, some kind of value, right? And they also have a data type. But in JavaScript, just to remind you, right, there is no strict typing of variables. It's a loosely typed language, and the variables are automatically discovered, the type, by JavaScript, depending on what you assign to them, right? So if I assign, in this case, my click me button is of type HTML element. Notice when I'm hovering over it, it gives me that little thing. The colon means type, right? So click me button is of type HTML element, right? Okay, but I want to make another variable. So here's my variable, right? And I want to declare my variable. And instead of click me button, I'm going to call this first heading, right? I don't have to call it this. I can call it whatever I want. But it's good practice to try and match up the names of your IDs, the objects, the HTML elements that are on your HTML document, and the variable names, so it's more clear for you, so you understand what that means. Please don't use some small abbreviation that you're not going to remember, okay? Now, I'm going to use the equals operator. This is the assignment operator. It's going to assign the reference. It's going to make that connection, right? Then I'm going to access the document model. Remember, the document represents the HTML document that's on my page, index.html in this case. How does it know to go to index.html? Because my app.js is linked to index.html. At the bottom of the page is a link, remember? That's how this knows what document I'm talking about, right? Document dot, and notice that when I put dot up, it gives me a selection, a list of selection. There's two different types, remember? We can hook into some kind of method. A method is just a function that I reuse. I can reuse my code of my function over and over again, right? For those people who don't know. Or a property, it looks like this. Like, for example, anchors or attribute node or other things here. Then we'll explain what those are later. But for now, I want to get element by ID. That's the search. If I go get element by, there's a bunch of them. There's get element by ID. There's get elements by class name. Notice the S in elements. That means I want to get more than one element. Okay, and we'll talk about what kind of containers that create here on the left side. All right. If I only get one element, I'm only getting one container. If I get elements, I create an array automatically on this side. This becomes an array. Okay, we don't want to make an array right now. Right. All I want is one object. Right. Get element by ID. You can also get elements by class name, like I said. So now I want to notice it tells me what to do. It needs the ID, the string ID of that element, and it's going to be called the same thing, right? Because that's what I've done. I've made it the same name on both sides. Then I need a semicolon. All right, I'm going to save my document. Now, first heading, if I hover over it, is of type HTML element because I'm still pointing to an HTML element. It doesn't matter if I'm pointing to an H1 tag or if I'm pointing to some other tag element on the screen. Because I'm using get element by ID, it assumes that whatever I've hooked into, whatever I'm pointing to, right, that's an element. And because that's an element, so is this. Now this is a pointer, right, to that memory address, a reference. I'm using different words to kind of help you with the idea, right? Now once I've got that, once I've got a reference, I can do something. I can treat this thing as if it has its own properties. An example of this was this. I want to change the inner HTML of my first heading. It's also called text content. Those are the two things you can use. What's the difference between text content and inner HTML? Does anyone know? I want you to intuit it. If you've never even heard it before, it doesn't matter. Think about what I'm saying. Inner HTML. What's different between that and text content? What would you say inner HTML is? What do you think it is?
Text is like we put some data in any paragraph or something. In HTML, we put in page or something. Okay. How
about someone else? Yeah, what do you think inner HTML means? So I'm looking at the H1 tag. What would be the inner HTML of the H1 tag? Is there something that's inside the H1 tag? Inner HTML, right? What was that? The attributes are the attributes. That's part of the element, right? Yes.
It has to do something with the elements.
Let me show you, because I want to make sure you guys get this. Here is my H1 element, right? The H1 element is made up of the tag itself, H1, plus the ID, which is an attribute, plus this, which is text, right? However, is it text or is this HTML? It depends is the answer, right? If you say inner HTML, it treats the stuff that I'm pointing to inside of the HTML, the H1 tag as HTML, which might be okay. Because, for example, if I put one element inside of another, you may want that. It'll return the first element inside of another element. But this is just text, so I can use text content because this is the text content of my H1 tag. All right, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I don't want to confuse you, but here's how it goes. All right, so I start off with my first heading. So once I've declared it, here I declared it. So I declare, right? I declare, or initialize. You can call it initialize, because I've done that too. The first heading variable, right? That's what it is. And the first heading variable creates a link or reference, right, to the H1 element, right, on the page, because that's what I've pointed it to, right? Then, once I have it, I can use it now. I can use my first heading variable as if it is the element, but it's not the element. That's what I want you to get from this. So it's not really the element, but I can use it as if it is. If that's the case, I can go dot, right? So first heading dot dot, I have things I can do to my heading, right? Like look at if I type in text, the inner text, right? The inner text or the text content, both of those are fine. If I go text content, right? What does this point to? This is it points to, in this case, this part, but the name, COMP1073 lesson 3, right? That's what it points to, okay? Are you clear on this? So inner text is the text that's contained inside of another element, okay? However, if there's an element inside of an element, nested inside, in this case, here's an element, a div tag, right? What's my inner text of my div tag? All of this. Even though it's not text, it's an element, it will interpret it as text. It will not even think about it as HTML, right? If I put text content. However, if I said inner HTML, it'll actually think about this as HTML and create an object on the other side, okay, on the code side. So now I have this text content. That's nice. But it doesn't do anything. I'm just saying, I'm pointing to the text content. I need to do something with the text content. Let's print it out. Let's show us what it is. And how do I print out properly? There's actually 3 ways. I'm going to tell you 2 of the bad ways. Here's a bad way. Alert. That's really bad, right? Let me show you the window. And I'll do this like this, the long way. Window dot alert. That's a really bad way of doing it. I'm going to print out the heading, right, to the window. And let's see what this does. So first, it's going to start my app. I'm going to get a reference to the first heading, and then I'm going to print out the first heading in a little alert box, right? Let's talk about why this is bad. I want to talk about it from a design perspective, why this can be bad, okay? Let's run this thing. Oh, man, I have to run it? That means I need some kind of server. Remember I talked about this? You're like, well, you don't really need a server, Tom. I can double-click and everything is okay. Yes, that's true, but I'm going to try and condition you to use something like light-server so that it continuously updates. Bam! Here's my alert. It comes up right away, right? And look what it says, COMP1073 lesson 3, right? Because whatever was inside of my element, this thing here, it printed out over here, right? Okay, why is this bad, this little alert? Can I do anything with this page right now? Hell no. This is a modal window. Modal window, all right? Notice that it's still spinning by. I can't even go and do anything with my browser. I'm totally locked unless I make a new browser window, right? Even then, let's use Firefox so I can show you what I'm talking about, right? Let's use Firefox, right? If I look up modal window, right? Modal window in Firefox, it's like a dialog box or some kind of pop-up, and it prevents. What it does is it prevents. That's what modal. That's why when I say modal, that's how it's spelled. Modal, a window or dialog, right? It prevents anything else from happening. It stops the operation of my page. Hey, listen. In small amounts, modal windows like this little alert box, it's okay. In large amounts, if this kept coming back at me over and over again, I would go crazy. I would never go back to that page again, right? This is an interruption of the user experience. And we don't want to use this page, the alerts, ever, unless we want to do some simple debugging and then take it away, okay? What else could we do instead of doing this alert? Notice now I'm back. Before I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even click the button anymore, right? The other thing to do instead of doing an alert is I could do something else, which is even worse, right? And which I don't recommend. So this alert, I don't want you to use alerts. I know sometimes the book will say, use an alert, and then it'll come up and you can populate what you're doing in the alert. It'll actually show up in your web page. We don't do alerts when we do debugging, okay? We use the debugger inside of Chrome. That's what we do. When we look at it in the console, that's the right way to do debugging, right? Here, this can work, but just because you have a gun doesn't mean you should shoot it, right? Doesn't mean you should pull the trigger, right? You might have a gun at home, but doesn't mean you have to kill anybody. I said that before, right? Keep it locked away, right? This is a gun, right? It can really hurt the user, right? Because the user's never going to come back to your website if he has a lot of these. I definitely won't. If I have a lot of pop-ups all the time, I'm like, plus my pop-up blocker will block them. It won't even work, the website, right? So don't use these. I'm going to kind of put this in like this and kind of say something like, don't use this, right? I don't know if there's a better way of saying it. It's recorded on the video. Please don't use this. Here's another really bad way, okay? I want to do document Right. Woo, this is really bad, right? And I'm going to put the same thing I put in last time. I'm going to put this first heading .text content. First of all, what am I doing with document.write? I'm accessing the document, HTML, and then I'm writing to it. What am I doing to the document? I'm destroying the document. I'm overwriting everything. It's going to be gone in a puff of smoke. Gone. The document no longer lives. This is bad. This is very bad. This is worse than the pop-up, right? Please, whatever you do, if the book says, for any book tells you to do document.write, read it and forget about it, all right? It's disastrous. It can end up destroying your entire page, okay? Please don't use it. Let me show you what it does, right? So I'm going to kind of close this off for a second. And we're going to run this page now the way it is, right? So if I go back to our page, which is already running, right? Here it is. So anything else after this has been destroyed because I did a document write. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. If I go view page source, right? I did a document write. That means anything inside after this page, right, where I wrote that document, where I wrote that in. So here I did an H1 tag, right? And then I printed out that again. Well, first of all, where did it go? This document, right? It's gone. It's not even in here. And if I try and do anything else to show after that time, it may fail. So my telling you is this: don't do it, right? You're going to get inconsistent results, and you don't want that, right? Document.write, okay? Please do never ever use this one. You know, some people are like, Tom is exaggerating. It doesn't have to be. You can use it for troubleshooting. Yeah, but if you forget about it and you put it on your client's site, what's going to happen? You're going to fix it after, and it's going to cost you money and time. Don't do it. Better to do console log, non-destructive, right? Console log, what it does is it still prints out everything. It goes to the console, right? And where is the console? It's on the bottom over here, right? I can right-click on Chrome, go to inspect, and I want to click console, and you can see now that my stuff is down here. Now, I have to say, and I have to be honest with you, I don't want you getting into the habit of leaving everything inside this place, okay? I don't want you to leave a bunch of debug comments here, right? Console log should only be used temporarily, and then your console.log command should be removed if you forget about them. And if someone knows where to look, they'll see your comments, right? So it's something where you do it for yourself, okay? I'm just being honest and telling you this. So, but worst case scenario, it's not going to harm your website. Chances are, unless you do something in a loop, like you're outputting things every frame or something, like every 16 milliseconds, then it'll harm your performance, right? But otherwise, if you just do it one time like this, it's not going to hurt you. Even if I do this, here's my click. Notice that it keeps on ticking up. The number keeps going up because when I click my click me button, it outputs to the console, right? That's the result. Okay, I've been really dramatic. Okay, I've been really dramatic about telling you not to do stuff, right? But I'm telling you this because here's the other one. Don't do this, right? So don't do this either, right? Which is document.write. You don't want to do that ever, right? You never want to do this. Right? But this is okay. Right? Because this one is non-destructive. It's going to go to log. By the way, I don't have to just use log. I can use console.info. Let me show you the different ones. This is console log. Console.info. Right? Info. Here's the info. Here is the info. Okay. Console. You can see all the other ones that they have here, right? Console.error. An error occurred. Right? Console.debug. Debugging information. Okay? Those are all the different kind of console commands you can issue. It's still accessing the console, but what is all this do? Let me show you the effect. I go back here and gonna go to inspect, and if I look at the console, now I have 3 different things. Here's the info. Looks like this little info button comes up. The error, an error occurred, comes up in red, right? Debugging information comes up in blue, and console log comes up in black, right? Why is this good? Because I can separate errors on the console that you generate. You make that error happen on the console, and you can see that it also shows up on the top right corner up here as an error, right? I've generated this error now. It highlights the error, and it also tells me which line it is inside of your app.js, right? So it's really good information. This is how I want you to troubleshoot. I don't want you to use alerts, and I don't want you to use document.write. Please don't do document.write. Document.write is like anathema, right? Sorry to say it that way. That's the Greek word, the Greek way of saying anathema, katastrophia, right? You know, I don't know if there's a better way to say it in Greek for you guys to understand. Don't do it. It's a zombie apocalypse, right? When you do document.write, potentially, right? Questions around this about debugging and putting things out to the console and hooking things up onto the screen. So I've made references, right? Okay, now I want to write some stuff to the screen. I want to write something inside of a paragraph. Remember, this is your assignment number 1. Write paragraphs or something information with your variable. Yeah.
Okay, so and what's the difference between HTML and text content?
Text content and HTML. Inner HTML gives you all the inner HTML. Example of that would be, if you want me to show you a good example, I'm glad you asked if you didn't understand that or I didn't quite explain it correctly. So here, I'm making a link to my first heading, right? And I got some information about my first heading. And I got a link to my button, and I did some information about my button, right? Okay, let's make another one to the div tag. Okay, so inside my index.html, I have a div tag with a class of container. Let's call this ID. I'll also give it an ID. I can do this, right? Which we're going to call main content div. It's descriptive, right? It's just a description of what it is. You can make it whatever you want, right? Main content div. I'm using upper camel case here, right? So every word is capitalized. You can use camel case if you want. You can use whatever word you want. Something that makes sense, though, right? I'm going to go back to my app.js. Here's my app.js, right? And I want to make a link. So the first thing I do is what? I want to make a hook to my div tag. What do I need to do first? You asked. You answer. Is it Alex or Alexander? Alex, tell me what I do first. Give me the exact thing. No, give me the words. I want you to tell me what to type. Yep. Okay. Main. So it's the main div tag, right? So we'll call it main div. Is that what I called it? Did I call it main div? Does it matter?
No, it doesn't.
Main content div is what I called it. Yeah. And then? Document. Get element by ID, right? And then? Right. Main content div. Just to make it easy, right? Because that's why I do it. So it's the same. Okay, now that I've got that, what's the next thing I need to do? I want to use inner HTML, right? And I want to output the inner HTML to the console, not to an alert, not by God to document.write, right? And then everything is good. How do I do that? Console.log or console.debug or console.info. So it's main content div dot inner HTML, right? Okay, let's see the difference now. So if I go back to my console, here's the thing. And if I refresh my screen, look at this.
Oh, okay.
See the difference?
Yeah.
That's the inner HTML.
Okay.
That's different than this. It's formatted and it understands that it's HTML. Once I have HTML, I can do all kinds of stuff with it, right? Here's what I can do with it. An example of that would be if I go back to my page, and if instead of printing out inner HTML, right, I want to look at my main content div itself, right? So just by itself, just the main content div. This is the object, the element that's on that page. If I output this to my page, what do I get? If I go back here, you can see now that I got this little arrow here. And if I actually hover over it, it actually gives points to my div tag. That's what it does, right? Let me show you that. So all I'm doing is I'm pointing to my div tag now, not my inner HTML, just my div tag. And if this little arrow, if I open it, it actually shows me all the stuff that's inside. And I keep opening that up and keep opening that up. This is all on the console, right? So I see every part of my inner HTML of my document, right? But that's because I'm pointing to the div tag. I can do the same thing with a button. I can do the same thing with anything, right? The difference is when I pass it back as inner HTML, I can treat it as HTML. Okay? Here's the way I can what I'm talking about here. If it's HTML now, it's of type HTML. It's not of type element anymore. It's not an element like this. See, this is an element. Let's assign it. Let me show you. I'll make another variable, right, called main content inner HTML, just to make a big long variable name, right? And that's going to be equal to main content div dot inner HTML, right? If I do that and I hover over this, look what I get. Is it HTML element anymore? No, it's a string, but it's not just any string. It's HTML. It's got all the elements inside of it, right? If I made this inner text or text content, I'm also going to get a string, right? If I hover over here, string. They're both strings, but one different because there is no text content. It's just HTML, right? So now I got my error. Oh, I got to print it out. I didn't do that. It's good questions though. Console.log main content div, main content inner HTML, right? So you see what it says. But actually, it's not really HTML. It's inner content or text content. No HTML, just the inner text, the text content. It avoided all the HTML. I'm still looking at the exact same element, but I don't have my HTML. The spacing is right? But I have nothing in there. There's no div tags. All those have been stripped away, right? And I only get my text. Why is this great? Because I can replace it like that. Once I can get to the inner HTML of a section, I can do special effects where I can replace it. How do I replace it? Because now we're talking about putting things out. Right now I'm reading stuff from my document, right? Now I want to write to my document, not with document.write. Please don't do document.write. I want to write out to my document, and I want to do it the right way because this is part of assignment 1, right? So I want to put first I need structure. Remember, we talked about the 3 layers of building websites. Structure, semantic HTML. Presentation, it's got to look good, right? With CSS. And the last one is behavior, which is JavaScript, right? So we need good structure and good CSS before we do any kind of behavior modification, right? And the way to do that is in my HTML, I have right now some content. Here's my main content, and I have an H1 tag. Now we've been fooling around with it. If I want to change my inner HTML of this or text content, which is the right way to do it, all I have to do is use my link to my first heading, right, and assign a value to it instead of reading from it. So it's both a getter and a setter, if you understand what I'm talking about. Let's go back. So here's my code. Here's my code. Let's get rid of this stuff here because we don't really need to see this right now, right? And all this we can get rid of too because this is just showing you what all these do. And this is recorded, so you can always go back and check out what those do. But I've got my first heading, and I have a reference to my first heading. And I want to write to the text content area of my first heading. How do I do it? It's pretty simple, actually. It goes like this. First heading dot text content, right? Text content. What if I say is equal to? Can I do that? Is equal to blah, blah, blah. Right? Can I do that? You can make it whatever you want. If I'm right, it does both reading and writing from that property, right? So if I go back to my site, then I should see blah, 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 right? I've overridden whatever was there before. I don't care about it. It gone, right? And if I actually look at the elements that's in my page, so I kind of look at if I inspect my elements, I go into my body, right? And I look at my main content div. This is where it is. Inside there is a row, and inside there, and I keep going. Look, it says blah, blah, blah. It even says it in the document. I have overridden what's in my document with what I put in there through my code. That, my friends, is the way you inject content into a page. Do I want to do this all the time? The answer is absolutely not. I don't want to inject content. Typically, I want to read content or I want to get it from someplace like a database. For me to inject it like manually like this, it's kind of ugly. However, for your assignment, that's what I've asked you to do. Place content inside of some kind of variable, and then write it out to the page. That's what I've asked you to do. Very simple assignment, actually. All right. Let's do it together for once. All right. So I've done it here, but that's one. This is my first heading. Let's just not. The first heading doesn't make any sense, right? We're going to leave it as what it was. I want to make a paragraph element, right? It's inside my index.html. I've got my h1 tag. I want to make a paragraph element. Here's my paragraph element. It's going to be before my button, right? My button. And my paragraph element is going to be empty, but it's going to have a ID of first paragraph, right? You can make it whatever you want. It's got nothing inside of it, my paragraph, right? Okay, remember, I have the means now of linking to this paragraph element because I've added an attribute, ID of first paragraph. I've named this whatever I want, first paragraph. And now I can go back in my app.js and make a link to it. So these are the 3 steps, right? 3 steps. I'll put them down here. So 3 steps for injecting content onto your page. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just understanding of the document itself, right? So first, step 1, make a reference or create a reference to an element. Right? That's step 1. This is my pseudocode, right? Step 2. Okay. Once I create my reference, I can assign a value, right? That's step 2. Actually, there's only 2 steps if I say it this way. But step 2 would actually mean create a variable. Maybe we should do this. Create a variable that contains your content. That's the first thing, right? And then maybe step 3, assign the variable with your content, right, to the reference variable. Right, so what I mean by that is the reference variable would be this one, right? So this is the reference variable. Down here, this is your content variable, right? And now you're going to perform an operation down here, right? Let's do this, right? So I want to kind of step in there and do that. So the first thing I need to make okay, I'm going to go over here. How do I make a reference? How do I do it? What do I need to type? Var, right? First thing is var. And then I need to make a name for the variable. The name has to be, it's case sensitive. Remember, it cannot start with a letter. It cannot start with a number or an underscore. Let me take that back. It cannot start with a number or special characters, weird special characters. It's case sensitive, and it's unique, right? So an example would be if you use the same one, you'll overwrite the other one, right? So in a variable case, I could make something called first paragraph. It's the same name. Now it's just my convention. You don't have to do it that way. I need to make it equals to document.getElementById, and inside there is the name of the ID, which is first paragraph. In this case, again, you don't have to make it the same. Next, step 2, right? I need to make a content variable with my content. My content, right? Here's my content. It was a sunny day in Florida. It felt great. I love the sun, right? I'm making this up, guys. Your content, right? Whatever. Okay. I don't know why I chose Florida. It was just random thoughts. I could have said it was a dark day in the void where Cthulhu lives. I don't know. Whatever you want, right? Okay. But I wanted to be positive and sunny as opposed to, it's a zombie apocalypse. Okay. So I'm trying to give positive messages here. Okay. The next part is assign the variable with your content, which is my content. Assign that value to the reference variable. What I mean by that is, maybe it's not worded correctly exactly, but I want to do something like this. First paragraph dot, and again, is it text content? Yeah. Is equal to my content, right? Maybe we should say to the text content property of the reference variable. And just one of these. So give me a second while I modify. So text content property of the reference variable. That's what I'm assigning. Okay. So this now my paragraph should say it was a sunny day in Florida. It felt great. I love the sun. Okay. Let's see if that worked. Right. I'm going to go back to my page, and if everything worked well, oh man, what happened? How come it didn't update? Why did my page not show that information? How come it doesn't show anything at all? Did I make the wrong link? Did I call it the wrong name? How come? Anybody have a clue? Oops. Yes, let's go here. Did I save my file? Did I add my link? So a paragraph with an ID of first paragraph. Make sure it's spelled correctly, right? Paragraph. Okay. I need to go into, here's my app.js, right? First paragraph. Make sure this is correct. So get selection. Oh man, what did I do there? I made a mistake. It's okay, right? And that's the first thing you should check. Did I do the right steps? It's not get element by ID. That's what I wanted, but somehow I selected get selection. Okay, get element by ID is what I want. I don't want to even correct me, just because I just let me go, right? That's what I want you to do. I want you to send it out, right, out to the page, and I go and again, is this in real world what we do? Do we send content out to the page like that? Not often, right? Typically, we do all of our content inside the page. What I'm getting you to do is read right now and write. So I'm reading. I'm actually kind of connecting to the elements on the page and writing something to the element. That's all. That's what the exercise is about. I can do this to enter any text content value across any place on my page. A link, a nav bar, a button text. Anything that text exists, I can replace it with my own text, right? And sometimes we need to do that as a special effect. What else can we do with document? The document model is very powerful. I have access to anything that I want to do inside of it, right? An example of this would be if I want to remove an ID or I would add an ID dynamically. What does that mean? What I mean is, what if, just saying, right? I want to create data. I want to create content, right? I want to create an HTML element, not just text content, but everything. How do I do that? Well, I could write the HTML and I can put it in there as inner HTML, right? It would write the inner HTML right in there. You got it, right? That's very good. So if I go here, what we're saying is, if I want to write inner HTML inside my paragraphs, right now I'm writing my content. Let's make another paragraph, paragraph 2, second paragraph, we'll call it, right? In my inner index.html. So here's my first paragraph, and here's my second paragraph. So paragraph 2, right? With an ID of second paragraph. By the way, I'm making them first, second, just because. You don't have to. You can make it whatever you want, right? My second paragraph is also empty right now, but I want to inject HTML in there, not just, content, text content, right? Well, if I go back to my app.js, right, I want to do the same 3 steps. So first, I'm going to make a variable called second paragraph. Make that point to document.getElement by ID, right? And it's going to be called second paragraph. Okay? First step. Second step I want to make is some kind of my content. So we're going to call it my HTML content. Like that's what I'm putting in. Now I'm going to make it kind of formatted. So maybe inside my paragraph, I want to have an H2 tag, right? I'm writing it by hand, right? H2 tag with second heading, right? Here's my second heading. If you know HTML, you can certainly do this. This is really rough, but if you really want to. And then let's say we're going to space it out properly. So I'm going to kind of do one of these. Don't worry about this. Okay. So here it is. Why can't I do this? How come I can't do this? How come I can't split over 2 lines? JavaScript doesn't allow it, right? JavaScript will complain if you do this. So the way to do this is you start off like this, then you add something else. Plus, with a plus, you can concatenate or add additional content. So in the next line, right, I'm going to add some other content, maybe inside another paragraph inside the paragraph, right? And we'll call this paragraph, right? Remember, I always do the beginning and ending tags, right? This is an inner paragraph to the second paragraph. There we go. Sorry, I'm going outside my lines, but that's how it is, okay? So this is the content, right? It looks like HTML content, right? And you can put whatever you want in there. It's not really beautiful by any means, but you can do that. And then, so I've got my HTML content, I've got my second paragraph, and now I'm going to say something like this. My second paragraph dot inner HTML is equal to my HTML content, right? So I'm taking this content, which is now HTML. It's important to make it in HTML, right? And I'm taking this content and I'm assigning it to the inner HTML property of my second paragraph, right? Let's see what it does. Right? Second heading got done properly. It's a second head, so an H2 instead of an H1, so it's smaller than an H1. It added some stuff in here as well, right? And it injected HTML. If I actually inspect the page now, right? So if I inspect the page, you can see that I have my second paragraph, and inside there is literally another H2 tag with another paragraph inside. It actually injected or created structure on my page. Okay, do I want to do this a lot? The answer is no, right? I want to have my set structure put up, because if I change my structure, my layout might shift. Things might change, switch around, or whatever. I don't want to mess up my layout. So typically, I don't do this, right? Typically. Can I do it? Absolutely. Do I typically do it? No. Sometimes, yes, because if I want to show something and hide something else, I can do those things. Questions around this stuff? Okay, so what have we covered before we take a short break, right? And then we'll end off with the last part, right? We've covered the ability for us to connect or make a reference, right? Make a reference, this reference from our code to an HTML element on the page, right? We need to make a reference. We cannot do anything to an HTML element on the page without first creating a reference. We create a reference. Now I have direct control over that HTML element in the code, right? And remember that reference means memory address. That means I have access to this memory address. It's almost like I have access. I'm playing with that element in my hand, right? If I don't create this reference, I have no access to my page content whatsoever. I need to create that reference, and I need something to hook into, and it's typically an ID. And I use the document model, and I use the getElementById method to connect to it. All right, that's what I do. I hook into it with my getElementById. The HTML element that I'm hooking into must have an ID attribute defined, and in my code, I need to reference that ID property. And what I mean by that is what we've done here and these steps. Here's the ID property that I'm referencing. Here's the content that I'm injecting. And here's the assignment of the content to the text content property. That's what I need you to do for your assignment 1. All right? So in your case, you're going to, after you have that content inside of there, don't change the structure of the page. Have the structure sit there. Pre-code it with CSS so it looks nice, right? So make it aligned properly and everything else. But you're going to drop content into there, right? And you're going to do it hard-coded like this. Okay? That's what I want you to do. That's the exercise that I want you to do with assignment 1. And also, of course, I want to see, a little bit about you. It's a little bit about your coding style. So remember, this is web design. So I want to see your design. I want to see how you're able to handle things, how you're able to lay things out. Show me your stuff. It's not just about server client-side scripting. Questions around this stuff before we break? All right, let's take a short break.